Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm so glad that Bob asked me to share my testimony. In sharing our stories, we testify to God's faithfulness and goodness in our lives. And I pray that after you hear this story, you'll understand a little bit more about God's goodness and faithfulness in your own life. And I want to connect my story to two truths. The first truth is that our lives do not turn out the way that we expect, and that's okay. And the second truth is, sometimes a blessing from a God who you're running away from can feel like a curse. So number one, our lives will not turn out exactly as we plan, and that's a good thing. For some of you, this may be a terrifying or even a very disconcerting thought, that your life will not turn out like you plan. But we should be comforted by this thought, because our minds are finite, and God is infinite, and He has so many possibilities for us that we can't even comprehend. My life did not turn out the way that I planned. When I was 10 years old, my parents took me to SeaWorld, and I was so excited to go and see the big show. We sat right up front, and as the show was happening, I was in awe of these animal trainers that were in the water with a whale. And all of a sudden, a whale shot up in front of me, and on the nose of that whale was one of the animal trainers. And I looked and I said, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to be an animal trainer. So when the show was over, I went down and I talked to one of the animal trainers and I said, how do I get to be in this job? What is the path that I should take? And they said, well, you either need to have a Bachelor of Science in Biology or Psychology. So after high school, I decided to go to Cedarville University and I studied biology. And I worked really hard. In fact, I spent several hours in the lab, and I probably have a permanent mark around my eyes from the goggles where I had my goggles on in the lab all the time. And I'm sure some of you bio majors can understand that. And even at graduation, I was sitting next to some of my classmates and they looked over and they said, you were in our class? I was like, yeah, you probably don't recognize me without my goggles and my lab coat. But I worked very hard to get my Bachelor of Science in Biology. And then after that, I actually got a job at the SeaWorld in Ohio. And I was a narrator, the people that talk at all the exhibits and give informational speeches. And that was okay, but I really wanted to be an animal trainer. So they had a position open for that, and I decided to try out. They won't even give you an interview unless you pass a swim test. And so I had to train really hard for the next 4 months to pass a strenuous swim test. And this swim test consisted of having to jump off from the platform in the show pool, which is about 25 feet high, and do a dive into the pool. I had to swim to the bottom of the pool, which is about 26 feet deep. I had to swim under the water back and forth twice, the width of the pool, which was actually the length of an Olympic-sized swimming pool underwater. So I had to train to pass this test or I wouldn't even get an interview. So I passed the test and I got an interview and I was so excited. But what happened was I didn't get the job and I was so disappointed. And I thought to myself, wow, God, like, what are you doing right now? And I'm so disappointed. I'd hanged all my hopes and dreams on this job and it didn't work out. But I ended up going to Ecuador and actually living there for a year to start out with, working with my old youth leader from high school. He was starting a retreat center. And the 1 year that I thought was going to be just 1 year turned into 7 years. And God really just used that in my life to shape me and actually give me a mission for my life, which is to facilitate a deeper relationship with Jesus Christ using nature and outdoor adventure. When I look back, it seems pretty silly to think that my whole life's goal was to be an animal trainer at SeaWorld, when now I'm the executive director of an outdoor education center at a college. I didn't even know this job existed. But God did, and He designed it for me to be here. And so your life will not turn out exactly the way you plan, but that's okay. Psalm 40 verse 5 says, many, O Lord my God, are the wonders which you have done. The things which you have planned for us, no one can recount to you. Were I to speak of them, they would be too many to declare. And that's true in my own life, that God's plans are too many to declare, and I couldn't even speak of all the things that He's done. Truth number 2, sometimes a blessing from a God who we're running away from can feel like a curse. So my vocation didn't turn out the way that I planned, but neither did my personal life. I thought by this time in my life I would be married and have kids, but that's not what God had planned for me. I spent years praying and wondering if I would meet someone, and if it would be the right person. Sometimes singleness feels like a curse. One day I asked God, "Why did you curse me with singleness?" And he said, "I didn't curse you, I blessed you." What? Are you serious? You expect me to believe that this is a blessing? And the reason I couldn't receive this blessing was that I had turned away from him. Kind of like when you turn to somebody and you just talk to them with your head to the side, but your body's not turned towards them. That's what I was doing to God. I hadn't turned towards him and to receive the blessing. So I turned towards him and I said, "Okay, God, if this is a blessing, prove it." And he did. And I've had so many wonderful times of digging into his word and spending time mentoring young kids. I get to travel the world and do all sorts of things that I have the time and resources to do. And most importantly, I have the time and resources to live out God's calling in my life, which is to facilitate a deeper relationship with him using nature and outdoor adventure. One of my favorite verses is in Hosea 2:14. It says, "I will lead her into the wilderness. I will speak tenderly to her. I will restore her vineyards, and her valley of trouble will become a door of hope." I don't know about you, but I like to be on peaks more than I like to be in the valleys. Even when I'm leading La Vida trips, I love getting to the top of a mountain. When I lived in Ecuador, I would actually climb some of the glacier peaks there, and I climbed one of the mountains that's the highest point. It's the closest point on Earth to the sun because it's on the equator. And I stood on top of that mountain and I just got to look down on all of God's creation, and that was amazing. I loved being on the mountain tops. But going down into the valleys was so challenging. Actually, going back down the mountain was the worst. Your toes are pushing against the front of your boots, and it's easier to trip and fall when you're going downhill. Your legs feel like jello because you've just climbed this big mountain and now you have to go all the way back down. And the valleys are definitely not the place where I like to be. But the valley is where the vineyards are. The valley is where the water flows and the fruit grows. And in the valley is where we can encounter a door of hope, and God leads us to that door. So as you're thinking about your life, I don't know what valleys you're walking through right now. I don't know if you're walking through a valley of trouble with relationships, with your vocation, with money, with whatever it is in your life that God is leading you into right now that feels like a valley. I pray that you'll turn towards God and receive the abundant life that he's offering you. Let him lead you to the door of hope. Trust that your life will not turn out like you plan, and that's a good thing. And what you thought was a curse just might be a blessing. Thank you.